My name is Matt Harrington. I'm the owner of Harrington Cattle Company and Copper Star Beef. We're here at the Copper Star Grow Yard where we feed cattle. We breed cattle, feed bulls for people to have better genetics and take care of a lot of replacement heifers and calves, and we also finish some cattle for our beef program. So we have one full-time employee that takes care of all the feeding. That's a huge thing for me because then I don't really worry about the actual delivery of the feed to the cattle and them having water. That's not something I worry about. But at the moment, like as we're growing, I do worry about a lot of the other things. Day to day for me, checking bunks in the morning to see do we need to feed a little bit more or do we need to cut back a little bit? And the cattle tell you that based on if their bunk is clean or if it still has a little bit of feed left. So that's the first thing in the morning is check that, make adjustments to the system based on what we see. And then the next thing is check the pens for any cattle that may not be feeling well or maybe a little bit sick, so we can give them some attention. Maybe take them into the chute, check their temperature. If they need to be administered some treatment, then we do that there. After that, it depends on the day, right? We might have cattle coming in on a truck that we need to unload and weigh and get put in the right place. Or we might have cattle leaving, so we need to sort them and weigh them and get them on the truck. Like today, we may have a group of heifers that need to be synchronized for breeding. And so we'll run them through the chute and administer what needs to be done to them. There's always broken water lines and broken fences and projects. You can never really just stand still. There's always something changing or needing attention in the facility. The rest of the day after kind of the morning routine, it varies greatly. And that's one of the things I love about it. I don't really like doing the same thing over and over again. We call this a grow yard because that's what we do. We grow cattle here. And obviously we maintain some, if we have cows or bulls. If they're in that growth stage, obviously cows, once they're mature, and bulls, you're just trying to help them maintain and be healthy. But calves, they gotta grow. Like for them to get to the point where they're ready to become beef, they need to grow. Cattle gotta eat to grow and to be healthy and to thrive. And so out on the range, they do that, but it's a lot less intensive. They kind of go out and gather what they need. But here, it's a lot more intensive, so we provide them what they need and use our knowledge of nutrition and other professionals that help us to get them exactly what they need based on their status, their life status, like their age and where they're at in the growth cycle. I don't necessarily think that I'm like the best person in the world for this job. I'd love to hire someone to kind of take over the day-to-day operations here. But it's someone that is patient. That's one thing I'm always working on. I'm really not the most patient person, but you gotta have patience with animals because they're different. Like you gotta be able to learn the way they react and act and adjust accordingly. Someone that genuinely cares about animals, right, is a big prerequisite, I would say. Someone that's gonna look out for their well-being and be able to give them the time and attention that they need. Even someone that really loves animals or loves cattle, that doesn't necessarily mean that they would know how to act around them or to react to certain situations. So someone with experience around cattle and not only handling them, but also like the sickness side of things, right? I mean, that comes with time, like being able to notice which ones aren't feeling well, and then also being able to know what's wrong and how to give them the proper treatment. Someone that can adjust quickly because things happen that you don't plan for, like cattle get out or water line breaks or something like that, and you have to be able to adjust quickly and kind of solve the problem quickly. It can be somewhat repetitive, but there's oftentimes you get curveballs thrown at you, so you need to be able to adjust. From the time I was just a young kid, I was drawn to the cattle industry, like animal husbandry, basically like caring for cattle. And I grew up on a farm where we grew plants, and that's still like in me, right? Like I'm always still drawn to that, but I just found myself being drawn more to like the animal husbandry. So when I got out of school and kind of came back home, it was like, what can we do to help the industry? The whole time I was in school, that was like the thought in the back of my mind was like, how can I use what I'm learning, not just in school, but in my other experiences, right? Like whether working or internships and stuff. How can I use this to help the industry back home? It's not just about helping people make money, but at the end of the day, like people have to make money or else they can't stay in business. And it's a way of life that I think is important to preserve. It is a hard way of life, but it's a good way of life to work the land and to take care of the creations that God has given us, right? And care for them and make sure that they are being used well and taken care of. And so that's why I do what I do. I want to see people in our industry thrive. And I want to be a part of producing safe, high quality beef. We all know there's literally nothing better than like a really good steak, or whatever your favorite cut of beef is. And it's exciting to me to be a part of producing such a quality eating experience right here locally. It's a high capital type of business. I mean, it takes a lot of capital to get going, so it's a challenge for a lot of people to get going, and sometimes the margins are pretty thin. So that's a challenge as well from a financial standpoint for a lot of people. The list goes on and on. So some of them, really most of them are outside of the control of producers, and that's one of the most challenging things, right? I mean, you have some of the things like weather. That's a huge factor that's completely out of our control, right? Whether it's too much water, or in our case, most of the time, not enough, drought. So you have weather, you have market fluctuation, which is also for the most part out of the control of producers. That's a big topic, and that's one of the reasons why we do what we do, is to try to help people have another option that maybe we have a little bit more control over, instead of just kind of taking whatever the market gives us or gives the producers. Packers, right? Packing plants, like that's how you take what we all do out here to the plate, right? And so that's another big challenge, is that there's a piece in there that most of us don't have anything to do with, and that's packing plants or processing facilities. And that's not bad, it's just the way it is, but in order for us to get our product to people, it has to go through, a processing facility, and that's fine, except that sometimes that sector can gain quite a bit of control because it has to go through them, If you look at historically, there were a lot more processing facilities across the country, a lot more mid-size or small-size processing facilities, and these days there's less. That's a challenge. There's some big processing facilities and some big companies that run those processing facilities, and I'm not necessarily against that. It's just the way it is. They have a lot of control. We don't have a processing facility. Fortunately, there's a small processing facility about 7 or 8 miles down the road, and they do really good work. And so we use them when people order freezer beef in a whole or a half or a quarter. That's who does our processing for us. And so we're really glad to have them so close and to have someone that does such quality work for us. And honestly, I don't really want to. That's not the business that I want to be in, or something that I would like to get into. I like the variability in the day-to-day. I also like the challenge of addressing the problems sometimes on the fly. It requires a pragmatic mindset. You have a problem, you got to act, you got to figure out a solution, and I like that. I like being outside. I like taking care again of animals and of what God has given us, and I love that my family can be involved in that. Being out here, just learning things that a lot of people don't have an opportunity to learn, and seeing the way things work, and seeing some of the harsh realities of caring for animals, which is animals get sick and sometimes animals die, and that's it's part of life, but we do the best we can to keep that from happening. But it's just it's real. It's about as real as it gets out here. If we go back several years, I mean, really, the first service I offered was this breeding service, artificial insemination. That's where, when I was in school, even still, I started kind of offering that service to people, just because I had a knack for it and I enjoyed doing it. And there wasn't a lot of people out here doing it. So that's kind of how I got started. I always knew I was going to be taking what I learned and bringing it back home and doing something, and it's changed over time, but that's really where it started, was offering services to people for their ranching operations, whether it be breeding, somewhat consulting, giving a little bit of advice. It's hard for people to take advice from such a young guy. And I don't pretend to know everything, but I've spent a lot of time learning different things and coming up with different things that could be helpful in our area. So that's kind of where it got started, and then slowly as different things happened, we adjusted and became more of an actual location, and then started offering feeding services. And then last year we decided, let's get into local beef. I think there's a market for it in our state. We have a pretty robust urban population, and a lot of people that are starting to think a little bit more about where their food comes from, and we feel like we can produce a pretty high quality product. So we transitioned into that last year. I guess what is a little bit different about us is where we don't really own any of the cattle. So we're providing the opportunity for people to take their beef and sell it locally, but we take care of that for them, right? Because a lot of ranchers kind of want to get into that, but they don't necessarily have time or have like the infrastructure built up to be able to feed and coordinate the harvesting and then sell it on a website or advertise it or anything like that. So we kind of made it to where multiple producers can benefit from that system if they want to, without having to do it themselves. So I would say that's probably what's different about us. Nothing that's good or meant to last happens fast or comes easy. And you know, that's hard for most people, I think, and it was hard for me. It's still hard for me to swallow that, you know. Sometimes I can see so clearly how I want our operation to be and how I want to see our industry, and it doesn't happen fast. It really doesn't. And it's not easy. There's a lot of days where it's really tough. It's like, you know, you have a lot of those problems show up in one day that you have to try to solve, and you don't feel like you're cut out for it. And in the back of your mind, it's like this, you know, you could just walk away or, you know, give up, but I guess my tip is don't, you know, and we try, you know, we don't. You just keep plugging away and stick to like what our foundation is, which is we want to help people, and we're going to be honest about it, and we're going to do the best we can and be real and upfront with people. And if we stick to that, it seems like most of the problems we end up being able to solve them and keep going.
With 10 different mushroom species packed into the most delicious gummies you've ever tried, this bottle has it all, including favorites like maitake, shiitake, lion's mane, reishi, and cordyceps. You'll experience a powerful blend of beneficial compounds that support healthy cognition and increased energy levels. These gummies are of the highest quality and efficacy, making them the perfect choice for anyone looking to perform at their best. Designed for a productive lifestyle, it's the easiest way to include all the benefits of mushrooms in your day.
I'd like to be able to see us have a little bit more control, or at least more options, right? Not even necessarily control, but just options. Create more options for producers so that they're not just stuck with whatever the market will give them. One of the things I would love to see is more like unity in our industry and working together. There's a lot of pride in our industry, which is good, right? I mean, like, we're very passionate about what we do, and people are very passionate and take pride in what they do, and that's really good, but sometimes it keeps us from working together, and I would love to see that. You know, when we came up with this concept, that was kind of the point, was to like bring people together, work together, coordinate on health protocols for our herds, even sell together, bring people's cattle together to be able to sell more volume and give kind of even sometimes the smaller guys like a chance to get in and participate at a higher level, even though they don't have the numbers. So that's the vision I have for this system, is working together and providing a excellent eating experience for anyone that wants it, you know, with local natural beef. When we say natural, at least in our program, it's just the cattle that end up in our beef program, they've never been given added growth hormones or antibiotics. That's just what a lot of people want, and so we feel like we can offer that. That doesn't necessarily mean, like, I don't think antibiotics are bad per se. Like, they have their place when an animal needs them. They need to be treated to thrive, you know, to be healthy, and that needs to happen. And so those cattle are kind of like pulled out of the program and not used anymore, but they get to live, you know. So it just seems like that's what people want. So we try to listen to the consumer and provide them with what they want. But we don't by any means try to demonize the more traditional methods of implants and stuff like that. We just feel like our consumers don't want that. So we try to provide beef that's natural, that doesn't have added growth hormones or antibiotics. So we don't feed any silage, which is a really common cattle feed across the U.S., just because we don't really have any close by or haven't ventured into that yet. So we do a mixture of grass hay or oat hay, wheat hay, and then alfalfa hay. And then we use flaked corn, steam flaked corn, which is basically the corn goes through a roller and a steamer to kind of start the breakdown. And then that's what we put in the ration. We use some distillery byproducts called dried distillers grains. And then we use a mineral package that addresses the macro and micro mineral needs of the cattle. And then we add a little bit of water just to kind of help everything bind together and make the ration a little bit more palatable. We use a nutritionist to help us make sure that our levels of nutrients are correct and proper for the cattle. And then we have different rations that we use those ingredients mixed together at different rates in order to meet the needs of the cattle. We are grain finished around here. Like the cattle that we finish out here or fatten to prepare for harvest, they are grain finished. They do eat corn. They also eat hay and all the other ingredients that we talked about. And the difference is just that the cattle here receive grain. A grass finished would be, an animal that has never really had grain fed to them. They would probably have eaten hay at some point in their life, or grass hay, or grass on the range, or grass in the field. And so that's the difference. As far as like in the meat, usually a grain finished beef has more fat content in it, which a lot of people like that what adds the flavor and juiciness kind of in your steak. And typically a grass-fed animal would have less fat, which some people like and some people don't. Some people think it's missing the fat, it's missing the flavor, it's missing the juice. And other people say that's what I want. I don't want so much fat, and that's fine. That's the whole point, is that we want to have want people to have options if they want. You've probably heard it said that a cow has 4 stomachs, and that's not really true. It's more like 4 compartments, right? The main big compartment that's like a fermentation vat is called the rumen, and that's where all the action takes place. And so there's actually billions of microorganisms in that rumen, and they're actually the ones that do most of the digestion. And so that's why we try to pay attention to what's in our ration, because what we put in the ration affects those microorganisms. So it's kind of a unique system. And that's why cattle and goats and deer and other ruminant animals are able to eat feeds that we aren't able to eat as humans, and a lot of other animals aren't even able to eat, because they have that system of microorganisms that break down those feeds that otherwise would be useless to most other animals, and especially humans. So humans can't go out and eat saltbrush. It wouldn't hack it for us, but cows can, because they have that system. So that's the main compartment, but there are 3 other, compartments, stomachs, like a lot of people call them, that have their role in the digestion. But the main one is that rumen that has the microorganisms, and that's where the bulk of the digestion takes place. Just going back to the range side of things, right? I mean, not here, because this is a more intensive operation where we do feed in confinement. Again, our pens are big and there's plenty of space. It's not like it's all overcrowded and uncomfortable for the animals, but they are in a pen. They're not out on the range. A lot of the misconceptions that I see around are like, well, we could be using the land that the cattle graze on, for something else, or to grow crops for humans. While there's probably some acreage across the United States where that may be true, that where technically you could not have cattle graze, and you could be planting something for human consumption. For the most part, especially in the West, that's not true. You can't go out here and plant a crop. There's too many rocks, there's too much change in the terrain, there's not enough water, and yet we can grow cattle out there quite successfully with pretty low inputs. And so cattle do a lot for utilizing a resource that would otherwise be wasted. And they also do a lot for the environment in general, fire control, fertilization, that kind of stuff. And so that's a big misconception, is that cattle are bad on the rangelands, and really they do quite a fantastic job and quite a great service to the land, as long as it's managed correctly. Truly, as far as a healthy protein source, it's pretty much impossible to beat beef. And someone could say well, you could grow peanuts or kale or whatever, and get your protein that way. Even the calorie count in beef is much lower comparatively. To get the same amount of protein, it's much lower. But it also provides other healthy benefits like minerals, like zinc and other stuff like that our bodies need. So it's pretty tough to beat beef. And like I said, they're utilizing range that would otherwise be more or less wasted. If you just leave them out there the whole time and try to finish them that way, it becomes pretty challenging, right? I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. The young heifers need to be separated off, because the bulls should not be with them yet, because they're not ready to be bred, and the steers need to be brought in to where they can be managed more intensively so that they can grow more quickly. And this is where some people disagree with that, and that's fine. You know, if people want to produce in a different way and leave them out on the range, like, you know, that's fine. It's more challenging because then it takes away from what your cows can eat. And so it ends up being some more efficient to bring the crop off the ranch and let the cows continue to do their thing out there as they produce the next year's crop, and then more intensively manage and feed their offspring. Now, I'm not saying like, well, that's the way we do it because that's the way we've always done it. If anything, like, I'm against that mindset, right? But it is more efficient that way to take the crop off the range and let the cows continue to utilize the range to grow next year's crop. That calf is born and needs the nutrients from the mom, you know, the colostrum, the milk, and stays with his mom for a varying amount of time, depending on a lot of factors, but typically 6 to 9 months, that calf will remain with his mom, and it will be out on the range, you know, learning how to get around and eat. And they start eating at a pretty young age. Even though they're still getting milk, they start eating at a pretty young age. We call it weaning, right? When the calf is separated from its mom and done being with its mom, that's called weaning. That can be a stressful event for the calf. And so there's been a lot of research done about the best way to do it and when and how and stuff like that. So we try to encourage people to look at some of those options that are a little bit less stressful on the animal. And those include like fence line weaning, or where the mom is still kind of somewhat close by so that they can't get the milk and they're kind of starting that separation, but at least vocally and visually they're still able to see their mom. Again, that doesn't always work out. It's just not always practical. But there's different methods that you can do to try to make that as least stressful as possible. And at that point, calves usually go to grass or to a wheat field or to a yard like ours, where it's like their next step is like getting adjusted. You know, they're done being with their mom and they're kind of on to the next step. And the best option is to go to grass somewhere else, like either to a wheat field or irrigated pasture or somewhere where they can continue to forage because it's less expensive. But they're kind of on their own now. They're starting to grow more. Once they're up to a certain weight, and again, it varies, but just throwing out there like 750, 800 pounds, that's typically when they go into like a feedlot or a finishing yard or somewhere where that's their last stop before they, you know, go to harvest. And at that point, they're fed a pretty high concentrate, high grain diet to help them grow pretty quickly. And again, that just kind of goes back to like the efficiency of their growth and getting them to the next stage of harvest. In general, beef consumption has gone up. I mean, if you look at the trend, it's gone up. Obviously, our population has increased, so part of that is just from a natural following that as the population increases, the consumption of beef goes up. Honestly, in the last couple of years, I would say we've seen a little bit more of an increase in demand for beef because of things like the keto diet, the kind of research, the kind of push in the fitness industry, right? People that like to hit the gym, lift weights, trying to bulk up and stuff like that, pretty much can't beat the red meat consumption. And so I think that there's been a little bit of an increase in demand in the last couple of years due to some of those trends. We also have to deal with some trends or some forces from the other direction. You know, the push for like Beyond Meat or plant-based burgers and stuff like that. You know, again, which if people want to produce that and people want to buy it, that's their prerogative. I don't believe that they should be able to call it meat or by any means beef, you know, if it's not. I think let's call it what it is, and if people want to buy it, that's fine. We do have to deal with that and keep an eye on that a little bit, but I don't think, from what I can tell, that it's picked up a whole lot of steam. Pretty tough to beat, like a good old-fashioned steak. So I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, like, why are we doing what we're doing, you know? And should we keep doing it? More specifically, like, I could give you a pretty broad answer, you know, for the whole industry, which would be fine, but like more specifically for us here, I feel like our area needs this, you know? They need a facility like this. There's really not one super close by. There's a couple that aren't too far, but that's one of the reasons I feel like the people in the industry, the producers who I consider my friends and who I want to see thrive, you know, I feel like we're providing something that they need. It goes a little bit bigger than that, where I want to be actively participating in preserving our industry and in our heritage and our way of life, rather than just be a spectator. Honestly, the best place to get the most real information is from like following people like us, you know. If you want to get like more technical information and stuff like that, yeah, you know, there's universities and research and articles and organizations that promote and produce a lot of that information. But as far as just like finding out what goes on the day-to-day, because of social media and other platforms like YouTube and stuff like that, you can find out a lot of stuff about what really goes on in real life family operations really fast. So I would say start there and then learn for yourself, you know. I mean, there's people who don't want us to succeed, unfortunately, and sometimes they're pretty loud. I would say don't start there. You know, don't find a documentary that completely tries to destroy our industry and then write off all the rest of us and what we do. I would say start with us and see what we do, and then you decide if you think that what we do is good and if you can support it. We're really trying to grow the beef side, because if you develop the market side, then you can kind of back up and put more cattle into the program and hopefully get people paid a little bit more and keep things going there. But you kind of have to start at the end game. And so we're going to focus on that, on continuing to grow our brand to get some brand recognition. We have beef right now in restaurants in Arizona through a food service distributor, and that's really cool. Would like to continue to be able to provide that to people, you know, direct to their door or you know, directly to the consumer if they want, so that they don't have to necessarily go to a restaurant to find it, or so that they don't have to pay ridiculous amounts of money for it. We want to be able to provide that to them pretty reasonably. Less than 2% of the population in the United States is even connected to agriculture, and that's incredible. There's 98% of our population that pretty much doesn't really know what we do, which is fine, but that's why we welcome people learning what we do and coming to see it for themselves. So someday I think that we would like to do more of like a destination experience for people that want to come see what we do. There's so much misinformation out there about ag, and I'm not saying that all of ag is like completely innocent or whatever, right? I mean, of course, there's always going to be people that are doing things that they probably shouldn't. So, you know, I admit, you know, I can admit that, but we don't, you know, and most people don't. And that's the point, is that most of us that are involved in the food chain, in the food supply chain, especially in the beef side, like we care about what we do, and we take pride in that, and we want to provide a safe and nutritious product for people that they will absolutely enjoy. I feel like there's so many valuable things to learn out here for a kid, and I'm just grateful every day that he gets to come experience what we do out here. And it's not always super fun either, you know. Like sometimes he gets pretty bored, or we ask him to do some things that he doesn't necessarily want to do, but that's also part of why I like it. There's just something about like the responsibility that you feel here, because you can't really take a day off. I mean, we try to work out where we get a day off, you know, and have someone else watch stuff, but you know what I mean? It's a lot of responsibility to care for this many animals and all of the aspects of it. To me, that's really important for him to learn that sometimes when it's like, hey, let's go do something fun, like, yeah, that we will, and that sounds great, but like we gotta get our work done first. We gotta make sure everybody's fed and cared for here first, and that's important to me. There's also just a ton of fun for him to have out here, right? It's like a big adventure every day. There's just endless amounts of space and dirt to dig in and equipment to drive and things to do that are fun that most kids would think are fun. So right now it's just him because he's the only one old enough, but you know, it's all my kids. I want them to grow up with that experience and with that responsibility and that mindset that like we have a responsibility to care for something first before we go play, which we absolutely will do. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Safford, which is about 15, 20 miles away. I've always said when I got older and kind of, because we lived other places, you know, I lived in Italy for 2 years and then went to college in Idaho and then in New Mexico, and so we were gone for a while. It was good to go away, to live away from home, but it's not like this is the most amazing place on earth to live or anything like that, but you know, we like it. There's a lot of good people here. There's a lot of heritage here in our families, both my wife's family and my family. And I don't know, that means something to me. Not that I'm opposed to living anywhere else. In fact, I honestly would be open to living anywhere. But But you know, our ancestors came here and it was just like a total barren desert, and they carved this place out of nothing, you know, literally. And so, and that's cool. That means something to me. Like if they can do that, we can saddle up and we can address some of the problems that we have and the issues that we face, and we can make it work. There's actually a pretty robust cattle population and industry in Arizona. Obviously not compared side by side to Texas and Kansas and those kind of states, but as far as like what we have here, it's a big part of the agricultural industry. Beef is a big part of it, maybe the biggest actually. To me, it really doesn't matter what you accumulate in life. If you don't accumulate integrity, you have nothing. So I know that probably sounds like cheesy or cliche or whatever, but it's just the way it is. Like, I mean, truly, if you can't, at the end of the day, if you can't look people in the eye and tell them like you were straight with them, it really doesn't matter what else you do or don't do. It's just part of who we are. Like, we're gonna try to do good, try to do right, and if something goes wrong, like, we'll let you know, we'll adjust, but it's all gonna be straight up. I mentioned earlier that, like, as far as this facility goes, we're kind of new here, you know, just kind of started using it last year, and so there's work to be done here. I wouldn't say I'm like embarrassed or ashamed of it, but like I would like to improve it, you know. There's parts of the facilities that are like not ideal. Not that they're dangerous or they don't look great though, you know. I mean, they're just not ideal. And so there's things I want to see improve, but that's more of like from a structural, like an infrastructure standpoint. As far as like what we do, no, like I'm not embarrassed or ashamed. And in fact, like, again, it kind of goes back to, we try to do a good job, and if people have a problem with it, like, that's okay, but it needs to be because they just fundamentally disagree with it, and not because like they disagree with the way we do it, you know, to me. So yeah, not embarrassed or ashamed, but definitely willing to admit that like we can improve, you know, like we're always trying to like improve facilities and improve methods and improve practices to be better. The difficult part is there are still a lot of family farms, like family operations, which is awesome. There's also a lot of corporate farms, which is also okay. I mean, right? I mean, if someone is gonna do, you know, and they're doing it legally and ethically, then okay. But I think sometimes people really have a trouble with like the corporate ag side of things. That it's more of like a big business rather than you know, a family farm. So again, like that's fine, you know. If someone doesn't agree with bigger corporate farms, like that's okay. They're not all perfect, and the ones that are, if there's ones doing things illegally or unethically, they should be, you know, stopped or, you know, investigated or whatever. You know, I'm not against them per se. Like, I'm all for free markets and, you know, building the American dream however you see fit within the bounds of the law. It's kind of ironic that you have like some people that really like are against corporate farms and stuff like that, but then the family farms, like the little guys, are often the ones that get hammered the hardest by policies, regulations, you know, the media. And so it's kind of tough. It's kind of like, well, you know, if people want the family farms to stay alive, then we kind of got to create or maintain the environment where they can. And if not, if you're going to try to take them out, then you're going to have to get ready to be okay with corporate farms, because, you know, if we're going to wipe out all the little guys, that's what's going to be left. There's a lot of issues like that, you know, regulations, policies, and stuff like that, which again, some of them make sense. You know, there needs to be some oversight, but if their intent is to squash someone out, that's not really very cool. And so I think it's important for people to know where their food comes from, because that needs to affect the way you vote and what you support or don't support. Because if we're going to be honest, like, it kind of goes back to being independent, right? So like, if we just hypothetically, like, if it got really hard for ag in America, and because of people not knowing where their food comes from, so they vote for people who don't support American agriculture, or vote for policies or whatever that make it more difficult, then we have to rely more on foreign countries for our food, and that's just not smart. I mean, granted, we have a lot of trade and that's good. I'm not saying that that's not good, but it makes it a lot easier for a foreign country to have control over you if they're providing you your food. So it kind of goes back to that, like being independent and having control over your own food supply. It's pretty important. And so I think that a lot of people that don't really know where their food comes from, they don't really think about it that way. They don't think like, wow, we should protect American agriculture because then we'll have cheaper food, we'll have more access to food, and we'll have more control over our food, which I think everyone wants. Sometimes they just don't understand that that's what they want. I don't want to demonize traditional production ag. It's not bad. It's the local direct to consumer is just another option. And if someone's passionate about that, great. You know, it is good. One of the things that we can do when we take beef to our local processor, you know, a few miles down the road, is that carcass can hang for a couple weeks and do what's called dry aging. And a lot of people are pretty unfamiliar with that. Dry aging is one of the things that makes beef taste better. Like those natural processes of breaking down the beef occur for a couple weeks at a refrigerated temperature, and it increases the flavor and the tenderness. It just does. And so in that sense, yeah, I mean, that's better. But it's not necessarily, that particular thing is not better because it's local, but because it's local and more localized and smaller quantities, like we can do that. So yeah, it's better. Some people feel like it's better because they know where it's coming from. Like that information or that knowledge gives some people a level of comfort and satisfaction, and so I guess that could be considered better by some people. But the big commercial traditional way, it's safe, it's healthy, it's, you know, it's not bad. The other thing about local that's better, I guess in my opinion, is that it's local. Like, you know that your money that you're spending is supporting local people that are in your community or, you know, at least in your state. I've learned that nothing comes easy. It's cool to have dreams and it's cool to like have plans, and it just doesn't come easy. It just doesn't, I don't know. There's no get rich quick scheme in our industry, and you gotta start by being real with people, you know. And I think that's helped us. Like what we do is a pretty open book, and what we tell people we provide, that's what we provide. I mean, it's local, natural beef, just like we say it is.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoy our documentaries as much as we enjoy making them. Unfortunately, many of our videos don't earn enough YouTube revenue to afford the cost of production. But if you like our content, the best thing you can do is directly support it on Patreon. Plus, you'll get access to behind-the-scenes vlogs and commentary. If you're looking for something more in return, go to paragraphic.io, where you can buy our other products and services. Alternatively, you can shop our Amazon storefront for our favorite equipment recommendations. Also, check out Boca, where you can find beneficial supplements to optimize your productivity. We especially love the lion's mane and mushroom gummies. And finally, consider signing up to Multitude, a platform built for long-form content, where you and other content creators can share and monetize new videos every week.